50 always been competition for Jay. Remember, I'm about $1. What the 50 Cent?
Your thoughts on the allegations against Jay-Z?
That was interesting. When I was saying things, not knowing exactly what I was saying, but I was going with like, where's Jay at? He's mad quiet. Like while the Puffy thing was going on. But it's obvious now that his team was being made aware that he was in those allegations also. You know, so I hope it works out, because with his family, the things that go on internally is that those accusations are crazy.
This didn't come out in a press release. It didn't drop in a documentary trailer. It didn't get announced with a neat headline or a clean quote. It leaked. Messy, loud, side-eyed, and the second 50 Cent's name got attached to it. The industry did what it always does when uncomfortable truths start bubbling. It froze, then panicked. Because according to what's lighting up timelines right now, 50 Cent just ripped the curtain back on something Jay-Z allegedly kept buried. For 25 years, not a rumor from a random blog, not a fan theory, an industry whisper that's been passed around behind closed doors like a cursed VHS tape nobody wanted to play out loud. Until now, and the reaction? Chaos. People aren't debating whether it's messy. They're debating whether it's real. Because when 50 Cent talks, he doesn't whisper. He throws verbal grenades and walks away smiling. And when those grenades land anywhere near Jay-Z, a man whose image is polished tighter than a fortune. 500 annual report. It sends shockwaves through hip-hop, business, and the myth of untouchable greatness. This makes the Kardashians look like amateur oversharing. Because if even half of what's being implied is true, this isn't just tea. It's a timeline rewrite. A reminder that legacies aren't built on truth alone. They're built on silence. The reason this hit so hard is because it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like recognition. When 50 Cent started circling the topic, people weren't shocked because it was outrageous. They were shocked because it felt familiar. Like something they'd heard in fragments for years but were trained to ignore. And in hip-hop, ignoring things is often the cost of staying invited into certain rooms. Jay-Z's legacy has always been presented as airtight. The hustler to mogul storyline. The lone visionary who outgrew the streets, outsmarted the system, and built an empire brick by brick. It's a clean arc. Inspirational, marketable, perfect for documentaries, business schools, and billionaire profiles. But the industry has never been built on clean arcs. It's built on leverage, alliances, and selective silence. That's the part 50 Cent keeps poking at, not saying, here's the secret, but saying, you already know the secret. You just pretend you don't. And that's why the reaction mattered more than the claim. Because if this were nonsense, it would have been laughed off, dismissed, meme-feed into irrelevance. Instead, it landed heavy. People paused. Commentators tiptoed. Certain insiders suddenly became very careful with their words. That's not how fake stories behave. Fake stories get mocked. Uncomfortable stories get managed. For years there have been quiet conversations about how Jay-Z navigated power differently than the narrative suggests. About doors that opened faster than they should have. About moments where others disappeared while he advanced untouched. About relationships that seemed to protect him when storms hit everyone else. None of this is illegal. None of it is even rare in entertainment. But it contradicts the lone wolf mythology. And mythology is fragile. 50 Cent knows this better than anyone. He's spent his entire career ripping holes in polished images just by laughing at them. He doesn't accuse. He provokes. He lets the audience do the math. And when he started hinting that Jay-Z's rise wasn't as solitary as it's been sold, people didn't ask, is this true? They asked, how much of this are we allowed to say? That's a different question. The internet immediately went into archive mode. Old clips resurfaced where Jay-Z spoke vaguely about survivor's guilt. Interviews where he referenced moving differently than his peers. Lyrics that once sounded poetic suddenly read like disclaimers. Fans replayed moments they'd seen 100 times and noticed how carefully he avoided certain specifics. And then there was the business side. People started revisiting partnerships, breakups, and sudden shifts in loyalty that had always been framed as strategic genius. When viewed through a different lens, some of those moves looked less like brilliance and more like protection through proximity, not wrongdoing positioning. The kind of positioning the industry rewards quietly while pretending it doesn't exist. 50 Cent didn't invent that conversation. He just dragged it into daylight. And because he did it with sarcasm instead of seriousness, it slipped past defenses before people realized what was happening. That's his skill. He turns uncomfortable truths into punchlines, and by the time you laugh, you've already heard too much. What really escalated things was how quickly the debate split. Hardcore Jay-Z fans dismissed it as jealousy, clout chasing, old beef resurfacing. For attention, they pointed to Jay's longevity, his accolades, his cultural impact. And all of that is real. But defenders weren't arguing the same point critics were making. Nobody was saying Jay-Z didn't earn success. They were saying the story of how he earned it might be incomplete. That nuance got lost fast. Because the internet doesn't like nuance. It likes heroes and villains. And Jay-Z has spent decades being positioned as the final boss of hip-hop success, the blueprint everyone else measures themselves against. Suggesting that blueprint has footnotes makes people uncomfortable, especially those who built their own aspirations around it. Meanwhile, industry insiders stayed quiet. No strong denials, no loud corrections. Just vague posts about respecting legacies and not rewriting history. Those statements sounded noble, but they also sounded defensive. When history is solid, it doesn't need guarding. 50 Cent leaned into that silence like it was confirmation. He didn't push harder. He didn't release more hints. He let the vacuum do the work. Because in entertainment, silence creates its own headlines. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't about what 50 Cent said. It was about why nobody was rushing to shut it down. That's when the idea of a 25-year secret really took hold. Not a single event, not a smoking gun, but a long-standing understanding that certain truths don't get aired because airing them would destabilize too many narratives at once. Careers, brands, deals. The illusion of meritocracy in a business that's anything. And that's why this feels bigger than rap beef. This touches the myth of self-made success at the highest level. It pokes at the idea that the industry rewards only talent and hustle, not access and alliances. And when someone like 50 Cent, who has nothing to lose and everything to joke about, reminds people of that, it shakes the foundation. Jay-Z hasn't responded directly. And that silence is being interpreted 1,000 different ways. To some, it's class. To others, it's calculation. To a few, it's confirmation that engaging would only validate a conversation better left implied. Because once you start explaining, you start unraveling. And that's the cliffhanger hanging over this entire situation. Not whether 50 Cent is right or wrong, but whether the industry is ready to admit that its cleanest success stories were never as clean as advertised. Once the conversation cracked open, it didn't stay contained, it multiplied. That's how these moments work. One person says just enough. The silence around it does the rest. And suddenly the internet turns into a full-blown investigative unit fueled by caffeine, screenshots, and unresolved feelings about power. This wasn't just about what 50 Cent implied anymore. It was about what everyone else started remembering at the same time. Memes hit first, because humor is how people test the temperature of danger. Old Jay-Z photos resurfaced with sarcastic captions. Clips from interviews were slowed down, zoomed in, stitched next to 50 Cent laughing like he knew something nobody else was supposed to say out loud. People joked about industry secrets, like they were talking about Area 51. Everyone swears it's real. Nobody can officially confirm it. And anyone who gets too close suddenly changes the subject. But beneath the jokes, the tone shifted. Fast. Hip-hop commentators started choosing their words carefully, which is always a tell. Instead of outright denials, it was phrases like context matters. History is complicated, and we shouldn't oversimplify legacies. That kind of language sounds responsible, but it also sounds like someone trying not to step on a landmine. If there was truly nothing there, the response would have been louder, clearer, and quicker. Then came the celebrity reactions, or more accurately, the non-reactions. Certain figures who normally jump into every trending topic went quiet. Others posted vague messages about truth surfacing eventually without naming names. A few laughed it off publicly while clearly avoiding specifics. In an industry built on noise, selective silence speaks volumes. And the internet clocked it. Fans began revisiting old rivalries and alliances, mapping them out like a conspiracy board. Who benefited when others fell? Who survived storms that wiped out entire crews? Who always seemed insulated while chaos burned around them? None of these questions were new. They'd just never been asked this loudly, this openly, at the same time. This is where the conversation took a turn from gossip to systems. People stopped asking, what did Jay-Z do? And started asking, how does this industry actually work? Because if success at that level is built purely on talent and hustle, the math doesn't always add up. There are too many invisible hands, too many quiet doors, too many moments where certain people are protected while others are sacrificed. 50 Cent understands that math better than most. He's watched people get erased for less. He's watched narratives get rewritten overnight. And he's also watched how carefully Jay-Z's image has been maintained, not just by fans, but by institutions that benefit from the idea of a flawless mogul story. That's why this hit a nerve, because it wasn't about accusing Jay-Z of something criminal or scandalous. It was about suggesting that the story we've been told is incomplete, that some chapters were skipped, some details polished away, some relationships downplayed because they complicated the brand. The internet loves a clean hero. It also loves tearing one apart. And right now, it was doing both at once. Supporters rushed to defend Jay-Z with statistics, achievements and accolades, Grammys, business deals, cultural impact. They argued that no amount of speculation can erase decades of work, and they're not wrong. But again, that wasn't the point being challenged. Nobody was saying Jay-Z didn't earn his place. They were saying the process might not be as solitary or as pure as it's been marketed. Critics pushed back harder. They argued that questioning power isn't disrespect, it's necessary. That legacies shouldn't be immune to scrutiny just because they're profitable. That hip-hop, a genre born from truth-telling, shouldn't flinch when uncomfortable conversations surface at the top. And that's when the debate got personal. People started projecting their own experiences with gatekeeping, favoritism, and unspoken rules onto the situation. Artists who felt overlooked, fans who watched favorites disappear, creatives who believed talent wasn't enough without the right proximity. Jay-Z became a symbol, not of wrongdoing, but of how power concentrates and protects itself. Meanwhile, 50 Cent kept doing what he does best: nothing. No clarification, no follow-up rant, no receipts. He let the internet tear itself apart while he laughed from the sidelines. That restraint only made his original implication feel heavier. If it were just clout chasing, he would have escalated. Instead, he let the conversation outgrow him, and it did. Think pieces started popping up everywhere. Long threads about mythology versus reality, about how success stories are curated for public consumption, about how the industry prefers narratives that inspire consumers rather than ones that expose infrastructure. Jay-Z's name stayed at the center, but the scope widened far beyond him. This wasn't about one man anymore. It was about who gets protected, who gets rewritten, and who gets erased. The most fascinating part was watching how quickly people tried to shut the conversation down without actually addressing it. Calls for respect, warnings about tearing down our own, arguments that this kind of talk hurts the culture. But culture isn't a museum exhibit, it's alive. And living things don't survive by refusing to examine themselves. Jay-Z's silence continued, and interpretations multiplied. Some called it dignified restraint. Others called it strategic avoidance. Either way, it kept the conversation unresolved, which is the most dangerous state of all. Unresolved stories don't fade, they linger. And lingering stories invite more questions. More connections, more dots, more uncomfortable realizations. By now, the industry wasn't just shocked. It was exposed to scrutiny it hadn't prepared for, not because 50 Cent revealed a document or named a crime, but because he reminded everyone that power operates quietly and myths are maintained intentionally. The second act of this drama wasn't about proof. It was about pressure, Pressure on the narrative. Pressure on the silence. Pressure on the idea that some stories are too big to question. And when pressure builds without release, something always cracks. The only question left was what that crack would reveal, and who would be standing on the other side when it finally opened. By the time the conversation reached what felt like its final stretch, it stopped behaving like a scandal and started acting like a mirror. That's when things get dangerous, not loud dangerous, but quiet dangerous. The kind where nobody storms out, nobody denies anything on camera, and nobody needs to. Because the point has already landed. The industry didn't implode. It absorbed the question and adjusted its posture around it. Jay-Z's legacy didn't crack in public. It didn't shatter. It didn't even visibly chip. And that's exactly why this moment mattered. Power doesn't panic when it's challenged. It outwaits. Silence becomes insulation. Routine becomes armor. Business continues as usual, and in doing so, it communicates something without ever saying it. I don't need to explain myself. To supporters, that's dignity. To critics, it's proof of insulation. To neutral observers, it's a reminder of how untouchable certain positions really are. All three can be true at the same time. That's the uncomfortable complexity this moment forced into the open. What changed wasn't Jay-Z's resume. It was the way people talked about it. The language softened and sharpened simultaneously. Praise started coming with qualifiers. Accomplishments got framed with context. Sentences that used to end with certainty now ended with ellipses. Regardless of how you feel, even if parts of the story are layered, however you interpret the rise, those subtle shifts matter. That's how narratives evolve without ever admitting they're evolving. Meanwhile, 50 Cent's role crystallized in hindsight. He wasn't acting like a journalist or a prosecutor. He didn't present evidence or demand accountability. He acted like what he's always been in hip-hop, a stress test. The person who pokes at the seams just to see which ones are reinforced and which ones are decorative. He didn't need to win an argument. He needed to make the silence noticeable. And the silence was noticed. Inside the industry, the response wasn't outrage, it was containment.
Conversations moved offline, group chats replaced timelines.
People who spoke freely a week earlier suddenly found reasons to be vague. Not because they were told to stop, but because everyone understands how invisible rules work. You don't tug on threads that connect too many powerful hands. For younger artists and fans watching from the outside, this moment landed like a lesson disguised as drama. Not a lesson about guilt or innocence, but about mechanics. About how access shapes opportunity, how proximity protects, how stories get cleaned up for public consumption while complexity gets buried under inspiration. Those lessons usually get learned slowly and privately. This time, they trended. The irony is that none of this erased Jay-Z's achievements. Hustle still mattered. Vision still mattered. Work ethic still mattered. What cracked was the illusion that those things operate alone. They never have. And pretending they do is how industries sell hope without explaining infrastructure. As attention shifted to the next viral distraction, because it always does. This story didn't disappear. It settled, like a background app running quietly. Not loud enough to dominate timelines, but present enough to resurface whenever the conversation turns to power, legacy, and who gets protected when narratives collide. Jay-Z continued moving exactly as expected. Deals announced, appearances made, influence intact. That continuity spoke louder than any statement could have. Stability is a privilege. It signals that whatever questions exist, they aren't disruptive enough to alter momentum. That's not an accusation, it's an observation. And observation is what this entire moment was about. What lingered most was how carefully future discussions were framed. Less hero worship, more analysis, less absolutes, more context. That shift doesn't tear cultures down, it matures them. Cultures stagnate when their icons are untouchable. They grow when they can be examined without collapsing. This wasn't about declaring anyone over. That framing misses the point entirely. Nothing ended here. Something changed. The myth didn't die. It became flexible. And flexible myths are more resilient than rigid ones because they can absorb doubt without breaking dot in that sense. This wasn't an expose, it was a recalibration. A reminder that legacies are not just built, they're maintained, curated, protected, negotiated over time. That doesn't make them fake. It makes them human constructions operating inside systems that reward certain behaviors and discourage others. The most telling outcome was how quickly people tried to shut the conversation down without addressing it directly. Calls for respect, warnings about tearing down our own, and appeals to unity surfaced fast. Those arguments sound noble, but they often function as brakes. Culture doesn't move forward by refusing to ask questions. It moves forward by surviving them. And hip-hop, a culture born from interrogation and truth-telling, doesn't lose strength by questioning power. It loses strength by pretending power doesn't exist. What 50 Cent ultimately did wasn't expose a document or topple a titan. He shifted the lens. He reminded everyone that stories at the top are rarely complete, that success is rarely solitary, and that silence is rarely accidental. He pointed, and in an industry fluent in implication, pointing is often enough. This chapter didn't end with answers. It ended with awareness. The kind that doesn't dominate headlines but changes how people listen. The kind that sits quietly in the back of your mind the next time you hear a perfectly polished origin story and wonder what didn't make the final edit. Because in hip-hop, as in power, the loudest truths aren't always spoken if you made it. This far, congratulations. You didn't just watch a video. You sat through a power conversation the industry usually whispers about. Now don't act brand new in the comments. This is where you step in. Do you think 50 Cent was trolling for attention? Or was he pointing at something everybody already knew but nobody wanted to say out loud? Is questioning a legacy disrespectful or necessary? Drop your take below and don't be vague. This comment section is the real after party. And while you're down there, smash that like button like it's been lying to you for 25 years and just slipped up. Likes tell the algorithm to stop pretending this conversation doesn't matter and push it straight into the feeds of people who swear they're above the drama, but somehow know every detail. If this made you think, like it. If it annoyed you, like it harder. If it made you uncomfortable, congratulations, that's usually where the truth lives. Hit subscribe. 2. Because stories like this don't end when the video does. They resurface, they evolve. They come back louder when someone else decides to poke the same nerve. While other channels play it safe and read headlines, we break down what's really happening behind the image, the silence, and the power moves. Nobody explains .turn on notifications so you're early, not catching up through screenshots and half-remembered takes. In this culture, being late means the narrative's already been rewritten without you. Stay sharp, stay curious, stay skeptical. Because here at Fame Blueprint, we don't just follow the story, we decode the system behind it.